When I built my first raised bed close to 15 years ago, I was convinced I'd done everything right. I watched a couple of videos, bought some lumber, filled it with what I thought was good soil, and planted a whole bunch of vegetables. Within 6 weeks, half of them were struggling and I had no idea why. It took me years of trial and error to figure out that most raised bed problems have nothing to do with the plants. They come from decisions you make before a single seed goes in the ground. The science behind raised bed gardening is actually straightforward once you understand how soil temperature, drainage, and root depth interact in an elevated growing environment. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 10 raised bed mistakes I personally made so you do not have to repeat them. And I will explain the science behind why each one matters. Stick around for the bonus tip at the end because it is a simple fix that solved 3 of these problems at once. Raised beds are one of the best tools a home gardener can use, but they are not foolproof. They behave differently than in ground gardens in some important ways, and understanding those differences is what separates a bed that thrives from one that constantly disappoints. Here are the mistakes I made, starting with the biggest one. The first one I want to talk about is building beds that were too shallow, and there is a fascinating reason why this matters more than most people think. My first beds were only 6 inches deep, and I thought that was plenty. The problem is that most vegetable roots need at least 12 inches of quality soil to develop properly. And crops like tomatoes, peppers, and carrots need even more. In a shallow bed, roots hit the bottom quickly, which restricts nutrient uptake and makes plants far more vulnerable to drought stress. The science is clear. A deeper root zone holds more moisture and gives roots access to a wider range of nutrients. When I rebuilt my beds at 12 inches deep, the difference in plant health was dramatic. My tomato plants went from spindly and stressed to robust and loaded with fruit. If you're planning new beds, 12 inches should be your minimum and 18 inches is even better, especially if you're building on top of concrete, compacted ground, or landscape fabric that roots cannot penetrate. Next up is the mistake of using the wrong soil mix, and this one really cost me an entire growing season. I filled my first beds with pure topsoil from a landscape supply company. It looked beautiful going in, but within a few weeks, it had compacted into something resembling modeling clay. Water pooled on the surface instead of draining through, and the roots were suffocating. Raised beds need a mix that balances moisture retention with drainage and aeration. The science here is about pore space. Roots need both water and oxygen, and compacted soil eliminates the air pockets that roots depend on to breathe. After a lot of reading and experimenting, I settled on roughly 60% quality topsoil, 30% compost, and 10% coarse perlite or aged bark fines. That ratio gives you the organic matter and biology your plants need while keeping the structure loose enough for roots to breathe and water to move freely. If you squeeze a handful and it clumps but crumbles easily when you poke it, you're in the right range. Number 3 on our list is ignoring soil depth below the bed. And here is why this one caught me off guard. I assumed the soil beneath my raised bed did not matter because the bed was sitting on top of it. Wrong. Plant roots do not stop at the bottom of your frame. If the soil underneath is reasonably loose, roots will push right through and access an even deeper moisture and nutrient reserve. But if you place your bed on top of compacted clay or concrete, those roots hit a wall. Before I build any new bed now, I loosen the native soil underneath with a broad fork to about 8 inches deep. That simple step effectively doubles the root zone my plants can access without building taller, more expensive frames. If you are finding this helpful, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week breaking down the science behind growing better food at home. It is free, and it means you will not miss the next one. All right, let us keep going. The 4th pick is spacing plants too closely, and let me tell you why I think this is the most common raised bed mistake I see. Because raised bed soil is better than most ground soil, there is a temptation to cram plants in tighter than recommended spacing. I did exactly this, figuring that premium soil meant I could push the limits. The result was a jungle of foliage with terrible air circulation, rampant fungal disease, and undersized harvests. The science here is about light penetration and airflow. when leaves overlap and shade each other out. Photosynthesis drops and moisture gets trapped against the foliage, creating a perfect environment for powdery mildew and other fungal problems. I now follow recommended spacing or go even slightly wider, and the improvement in both plant health and actual yield per plant more than compensates for having fewer plants in the bed. The fifth one I want to talk about is not accounting for how fast raised beds drain. And there is a fascinating reason why this trips people up. And raised beds drain faster than in ground gardens because gravity pulls water down through the elevated soil profile more aggressively. This is actually a benefit for root health since it prevents waterlogging, but it also means raised beds dry out much faster, especially during summer heat. My first summer, I watered on the same schedule I would have used for an in-ground garden, and my plants were chronically thirsty. Raised beds in full sun during peak summer may need watering every single day, sometimes even twice on extremely hot days. The soil temperature in an elevated bed can run 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than ground level, which accelerates evaporation. Once I installed drip irrigation on a timer, the inconsistency problem disappeared entirely, and my plants responded almost immediately. Number 6 on our list is choosing the wrong wood, and here is why this deserves attention. I built my original beds from untreated pine because it was cheap and available. Within 2 years, the boards were soft, crumbling and pulling apart at the corners. Pine rots fast when it is in constant contact with moist soil. Cedar and redwood are naturally rot resistant and will last 8 to 12 years or longer. Douglas fir is a decent middle ground at about 5 to 7 years. I know cedar costs more upfront, but when you factor in the labour of dismantling a rotting bed, removing all the soil, rebuilding and refilling, the economics actually favour spending more on durable wood from the start. Whatever you choose, avoid pressure-treated lumber that uses older chemical formulations. Modern pressure-treated wood uses copper-based preservatives that are generally considered safe for food gardens, but I still prefer natural rot-resistant species for peace of mind. The 7th pick is skipping mulch on the soil surface. And let me tell you why I think this single oversight causes more problems than people realise. For my first several years of raised bed gardening, I left the soil surface bare between plants. It looked tidy, but the exposed soil dried out rapidly, developed a hard crust that repelled water, and became a highway for weed seeds to germinate. Bare soil in a raised bed is fighting against you. A 2 to 3 inch layer of straw, shredded leaves, or wood chips on the surface regulates soil temperature, retains moisture dramatically, suppresses weeds, and feeds the soil biology as it breaks down. When I finally committed to mulching every bed, my watering frequency dropped by roughly a third, and weeding went from a weekly chore to an occasional 5-minute task. Next up is the mistake of not rotating crops. And this one really surprised me when I saw the consequences firsthand. Because raised beds are defined permanent spaces, it is easy to fall into the habit of planting the same crops in the same beds year after year. I grew tomatoes in my sunniest bed for 3 straight seasons, and by that third year, the plants were riddled with early blight and producing half of what they had the first year. The science behind crop rotation is straightforward. Soil-borne pathogens and pests build up when the same plant family occupies the same ground repeatedly. Fusarium wilt, for example, can persist in soil for years once established, and it specifically targets tomatoes, peppers, and other nightshades. Rotating crops, moving your tomatoes to where your beans were last year and your beans to where your root vegetables grew, breaks those disease cycles and balances nutrient demands across your beds. Heavy feeders like tomatoes and corn deplete different nutrients than legumes or root crops, so rotation keeps any single bed from becoming exhausted. I keep a simple notebook tracking what goes where each season, and it has made a measurable difference in long-term productivity. The 9th one I want to talk about is building beds that are too wide to reach the centre. And there is a fascinating reason why this seems minor but matters a lot. My first bed was 5 feet wide because I wanted to maximise planting space. The problem became obvious the first time I needed to weed the middle or harvest something in the back row. I was leaning so far over that I was compressing the soil with my body weight, which compacts the very structure you are paying a premium for in a raised bed. 4 feet wide is the standard recommendation, and it exists for a very practical reason. Most adults can comfortably reach about 2 feet from either side, which means a 4-foot bed gives you access to every inch without ever stepping on or leaning heavily into the soil. If your bed is accessible from only one side, keep it 2 feet wide. I rebuilt all my beds at 4 feet, and the difference in both comfort and soil quality was immediately noticeable. Number 10 on our list is neglecting to feed the soil over time, and here is why this final mistake can slowly ruin even a perfectly built bed. I assumed that because I started with a great soil mix, it would stay great indefinitely. It does not. Plants extract nutrients and organic matter every single season, and if you do not replace what is taken, the soil gradually loses its structure, its biology, and its fertility. By year 3, my original beds had noticeably less organic matter. The soil was denser and yields were declining. The fix is simple but essential. Every fall, I top dress each bed with 1 to 2 inches of quality compost and a light layer of mulch. That annual addition replaces the organic matter that decomposed during the season, feeds the earthworms and beneficial microbes, and keeps the soil structure loose and productive. Think of it as an annual deposit into your soil savings account. Skip it for a few years and you will notice the balance dropping. Now, this is something I stumbled onto about 5 years into my raised bed journey, and it solved my drainage, temperature, and moisture problems all at once. The technique is lining the bottom of your raised bed with about 4 to 6 inches of coarse woody material, small branches, wood chips, or even partially decomposed logs before filling with your soil mix. This is a simplified version of a method called hugelkultur. The wood acts as a moisture reservoir, absorbing water during heavy rains and slowly releasing it back to the root zone during dry spells. As it decomposes over several years, it generates a small amount of heat that extends your growing season on both ends, and it creates air pockets that improve drainage and root penetration. I retrofitted 2 of my beds with this base layer, and the difference in how consistently moist the soil stayed through July and August was remarkable. It does not replace watering entirely, but it provides a significant buffer that makes raised bed gardening far more forgiving. That is everything I have for you today. Gardening is one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize there is to discover. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next video.